This really is an economic Pearl Harbor. That sounds melodramatic, but I've never used that phrase before, and this really is one.
But go through why that is true, beyond the fact that there's a freeze on credit, beyond the fact that nobody's making loans, beyond the fact that banks don't lend to banks, beyond the fact that Treasury bills are at a low.
Yeah, when 40 billion of Treasury bills are sold like they were last week, 7-day Treasury bills, at a yield of 1/20th of 1%, that means the whole country is basically at the point, virtually, or a lot of the country is at the point of putting their money under the mattress. I mean, you're only 1/20th of 1% away from where it's better to put it under the mattress. You don't want 300 million Americans putting their money under the mattress. I mean, this economy doesn't work well without the lubrication of credit and trust, and that's been lost. And it's a huge problem. What you have is you have the major institutions of the world all wanting to deleverage. They want to take down their assets and liabilities. They want to, what seemed so easy to borrow against a year ago, now it looks like rat poison to them. So they're trying to deleverage. There is only one institution in the world that can leverage up in a way that's all a countervailing force to that. That's the United States Treasury.
I'm interested in this because people are asking themselves, how did people get away with murder here? Were there people who simply gamed the system and took advantage and made huge amounts of profit, and we had excesses that inevitably led to where we are today?
Well, we had all of that, but I would say the biggest single cause was that we had an incredible residential real estate bubble. I mean, you can go back to tulip bulbs in Holland 400 years ago.
Yeah.
The human beings going through combinations of fear, greed, and all of that sort of thing, their behavior can lead to bubbles. And it may have had an internet bubble at one time, and you've had a farm bubble, farmland bubble in the Midwest, which resulted in all kinds of tragedy in the early 80s. But we have had 300 million Americans, their lending institutions, their government, their media, all believed that house prices were going to go up consistently. And that got built into a $20 trillion residential home market. Lending was done based on it, and everybody did a lot of foolish things. And where people really behaved in a fraudulent way or something, we'll go back and find the culprits later on. But that really isn't the problem we have. I mean, that's where it came from, though. That we leveraged up, and if you have a 20% fall in the value of a $20 trillion asset, that's $4 trillion. And when $4 trillion losses land in the wrong part of this economy, it can gum up the whole place.
At the same time, there has been, and congressmen and women will tell you this, a resistance across the country because they think, as you well know, it's a bailout of Wall Street, and that they are sitting there in their own economic life, and nobody's coming along to say, we're here to help you, we're from the government.
Well, the patient that's on the floor with a cardiac arrest is not Wall Street. It's the American economy. I mean,
do you think they understand that yet? Because that's the question of communication.
Yeah, I think they probably don't. And I think anytime you couple the term Wall Street with bailout or something like that, you know, I don't like what's going on at Wall Street. I don't like what's going on in executive compensation. You know, but I don't want to give a lecture to this body that's out there, you know, having had the heart attack. I want to get it back functioning. And as a practical matter, I mean, if you were at Bear Stearns and you were a shareholder, you know, you lost 90 to 95% of your money. A good many lost their jobs. They lost very cushy lives, many of them. If you were at Lehman, the same thing happened. If you were at AIG, the shareholders are getting creamed on these things. And those shareholders are not just a bunch of big shots in Wall Street. Those are pension funds, and those are investors all over the country. I wouldn't worry too much about that. Justice won't be perfect on it. I mean, you may be very mad at some guy that walked away with a huge golden parachute, but that really isn't the important thing. I mean, if Pearl Harbor came along, you could have said the planning was wrong by the military ahead of time, or maybe the battleship shouldn't have all been in the harbor and all that kind of thing. Right. It doesn't make any difference. I mean, the job, it's Pearl Harbor, and you better not spend weeks and weeks and weeks trying to assign blame or deciding on a complete plan for fighting the whole war, you know, and letting a committee decide where the battleship should go and all of that. You better spring into action with the best people you have.
So if this plan, you hope it will do what? It will loosen credit. It will stop the slide and the panic. People will have more confidence.
Confidence is key. Confidence is key. You're not going to put your money. You're not going to leave your money with me unless you're confident I'm going to give it back to you. And at this point, when Treasury bills, that 7-day Treasury bills at 1/20th of 1%, it's not because people want to earn 1/20th of 1%. It's because they trust the fact that Treasury will give it back to them next week. Right. And I'm sitting with $6.5 billion we're going to use to close the Mars-Wrigley deal on October 6th. Right. I've got to hand over that $6.5 billion on October 6th. Now, I have to be very careful about where I leave it in between now and then because they're expecting me to show up. When I lose confidence in other people, all kinds of institutions, and there are plenty of them that I've lost confidence in, then they get, their funds aren't available. They don't have it for the next. I mean, the whole economy just comes to a grinding halt. And confidence in markets and in institutions, it's a lot like oxygen. When you have it, you don't even think about it. I mean, it's indispensable. You can go years without thinking about it. When it's gone for 5 minutes, it's the only thing you think about. I mean, and that's exactly, the oxygen has been sucked out, of the credit markets and confidence. And there has to be, it's got to be given a jump start, basically. And
that's what this plan is about.
That's what I hope it gets done.
Would you say that this plan, which you have argued very strongly the Senate ought to pass and the House ought to pass, is simply the plan that we have, and I don't have a better idea, but it's essential for the confidence of the nation and the system?
Yeah, and I just worry about whether it's enough. But I think it is.
What?
Every day that goes by, I mean, if you don't react to Pearl Harbor for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, you are behind in the war that you otherwise would have fought. But it's very important that the determination of the U.S. Congress to do what is needed be made evident this week and by the actions of most of the members. I mean, you're not going to get total assent.
What makes you confident that this plan will work?
Well, I think you've got, I don't think you could have a better Secretary of the Treasury than Hank Paulson. I mean, he is in there at the wrong time. He probably shouldn't have taken the job. He's a friend of mine, but he knows markets. He knows how corporations work. He knows money, and he's got the interest of the country at heart. And so you've got the right person. You've got a wonderful person with Sheila Bair. Most of the viewers have never heard of Sheila Bair. Sheila Bair, in the last 2 weeks, has taken 8% of the deposits in the United States and seamlessly moved those over to sound institutions, which in turn have gotten more capital into them. It's been a magnificent job. 8% of the deposits in the United States, tens of millions of depositors, and nobody's ever heard of her. She'll never get a golden parachute or any severance pay or anything. She's done a great job. We've got some great public servants. We have, I think, the right people in there to get the job done, and then they need more tools. Well, they need plenty of money, and they really need plenty of flexibility to carry out this plan. They also need, in my view, to very much tie it to market prices. I have said, Charlie, that the $700 billion, if they buy mortgage-related securities or mortgages themselves at current market prices, they're going to make money over time because the United States government has staying power and it has a low cost of borrowing. And if I could take 1% of that $700 billion pot and take the gain or loss from it and be their partner, and they would buy the stuff at market, I'd make a lot of money. I mean, you have hedge funds and people like that buying these assets to yield 15 or 20%. I mean, that's the buyer for these people that are trying to unload them. The U.S. Treasury has got borrowing costs like nobody else has. They can borrow basically unlimited amounts. They can stay there for years and years. These assets will be worth more money over time. So when Merrill Lynch sells a bunch of mortgage-related assets at 22 cents on the dollar like they did a month or so ago, the buyer of those is going to make money, and he's going to make a lot more money if it happens to be an institution like the U.S. government, which has very, very cheap borrowing costs.
There is this, too, accounting. You have strong feelings about accounting and mark-to-market.
Right.
Tell me where you are on that issue.
And a lot of people disagree with me on this. I believe in mark-to-market. I think that accounting, in 1974, Charlie, it was either 1974 or 75, we owned a bunch of common stocks at Berkshire Hathaway. Okay. I told our shareholders what the market was, and we used that. I said, I think these things are worth a lot more than market, and I think we're going to make a lot of money out of it. But this is what they're worth today. And I don't think anybody gets hurt by telling the truth on that sort of thing. And I think that once you start saying we're going to peg these things at some price that isn't market, God knows what what a financial
because
statement.
the other argument these people make, who argue against you, will say the assets are worth much more than mark-to-market says, and therefore
they're not worth it today.
Therefore, we're not seeing a reality.
Well, but that is the reality, and that's the reality of what they're going to sell them to the Treasury for, I hope, too.
You'll get market.
You get in a lot of trouble when you start putting fictitious numbers
on value.
On value. I mean, you can explain the fact that these are depressed prices. We think these assets are going to be worth a lot more, and I think that case can be made in certain situations. But I think to just say, we're going to say a dollar of cash is worth $2 all of a sudden. I mean, it isn't worth $2. It's worth $1 today.
Yeah.
Once you get it off the ground, once credit flows, now the recession is going to get worse. I mean, I don't want to hold out false hopes that by some magic bullet that things will turn around in a couple of months, because they won't, Charlie. I mean, and it's a big mistake to try and mislead people. They will turn around. I don't know whether it'll be 6 months or whether it'll be 2 years.
It's more likely 2 years than 6 months.
I don't know. It isn't going to be 1 month or 2 months, no matter what happens.
You can imagine 6 months from now, it's beginning to turn around with the conditions that you know are there.
That's sort of the best case.
You have never seen anything like this in your life.
No, I haven't.
Yeah. There are those who argue that we're headed for a recession, and they look at depression as the great fear.
Sure.
Is that a possibility if this plan doesn't work?
Yeah, it's a possibility. Yeah. We have about 6.1% unemployment now. We've been in a recession by any common sense definition, because if you look at the American public, they've got 20 trillion, I should say, worth of residential homes. They got 20 trillion worth of stocks, very roughly. Those are the two big assets of American families. They're both down dramatically, for different families. But 95% of the people, at least, are worse off in terms of their residential wealth plus stock wealth from a year ago or 2 years ago. That is bleeding into the real economy. I mean, that's bleeding into auto sales and jewelry sales and furniture sales and all that. But that wave is just starting to hit. And if the paralysis we have in the credit markets, if every company continues to feel all we want to do is get our balance sheet down, sell assets, it's just the start of what can happen. Unemployment's going to go up under any circumstances. I mean, the 6.1 is going to go higher. But whether it goes and quits at 7 or whether it quits at 10 or 11 or 12 depends on, among other things, the wisdom of Congress, and then the wisdom of, in terms of carrying out the plan that Congress authorizes. It would be crazy not to do this. It will not produce dramatic results, though, in the economy. That's what people have to understand. You're going to see unemployment go up. You're going to see lousy earnings in many businesses, and you're
going to see people unemployed.
You're going to see more people unemployed. But the difference, Charlie, if we bottom this thing out at 7% unemployed versus 9%, that's 3 million people. That's 3 million people that, if we do it wrong, lose their jobs unnecessarily, in my view. I mean, I've never been unemployed. I've never been very fully employed either. But just think of what it's like, to go home with a mortgage payment, and kids and everything else. My dad had that happen to him in the early 30s. You don't want to create 3 million people more unnecessarily. But I don't think you can't.
That's the depression.
It really is, and you can't help some increase from this point. I don't want any viewer to go away think that a magic wand exists in Congress. So they're going to see some more bad news, but if we do this, we're doing the right thing, and the system will work over time. There's no question. We got a wonderful system.
Okay, but what's all this going to do to the price of the dollar?
It could be very tough on inflation. Could be is a likely consequence out of what's going on now. I mean, right now, we are in effect making to some extent making a choice between future inflation and getting our getting off the floor. And we're likely to have more inflation in the future as a consequence of the things we do to fight the present situation.
When you look at the prospects for this country. There are other people who argue, that America, as good as it is, it lives in a world today, and there are books being written in which our supremacy, our primacy, will now have to be shared. That we may still own as much of the pie as we have, but other people own a lot more.
That's great. I want our pie to grow all the time, but if other guy's pie is growing a little faster, that's terrific. It'll be good for us in the long run. And I mean, there are 6.5 billion people in this world, and it's great for 300 million to keep enjoying more and more prosperity. But I think it's terrific if the remainder do. And I think if they can learn something from us in terms of our system, and I think they have, they're learning more about how to unleash the potential of their citizenry to turn out more goods and services that their citizens want or that we want. I think that's terrific, and that's I think it's much better to live in a world where those around you, particularly when some of them have nuclear bombs.
What do you believe might never be the same?
Oh, I think confidence will come back. I will tell you this: this country is going be living better 10 years from now than it is now. It'll be living better 20 years from now than it is 10 years from now. The ingredients that made this country, the miracle of the world. I mean, we had a 7-for-1 improvement in the average American standard of living in the 20th century. Now, we had the Great Depression, we had 2 world wars, we had the flu epidemic, we had oil shock, we had all these terrible things happen. But something about the American system unleashed more and more of the potential of human beings over that 100 years, so that we had a 7-for-1 improvement. There's never been any. I mean, you have centuries where if you got a 1% improvement, it would have been something. So we've got a great system, and we've got more productive capacity now than we ever have. The American worker's more productive than he's ever been. We've got more people to do it. We've got all the ingredients for a sensational future. It's just that right now the athlete's on the floor. But this is a super athlete.